So what is happening in Cuba right now in March of 2026? To put it bluntly, the country is in the middle of a complete and total collapse. The nation is paralyzed, its infrastructure is crumbling, and its people are trapped. We're going to break down how things got to this breaking point.
And that's not just us saying it. When the White House, President Trump himself calls Cuba a failed nation, well, that's not just political rhetoric. It reflects a really grim reality on the ground, and it sets the stage for a major diplomatic showdown.
So, here's how we're going to break this all down. We'll start with the human cost. Then, we'll look at what caused this whole mess. We'll examine the secret negotiations going on, check in on the international players, and finally, explore what the future could even look like for Cuba.
All right, first up, what does this crisis actually look like and feel like for the people who are living through it? This isn't just some abstract economic problem. We're talking about a complete system failure, and the human cost is absolutely devastating.
Think about this number for a second. 11 million. In mid-March of 2026, that's how many people were plunged into darkness when the national power grid didn't just flicker, it completely died. The whole country offline.
And from there, it's just a domino effect, right? We're talking daily blackouts, sometimes lasting 20 hours a day. Daily life is paralyzed. People are taken to the streets with castrolazos, banging pots and pans in protest. Hospitals are suspending surgeries. Water pumps don't work. And maybe most telling, a staggering 10% of the entire population has already fled the island. Which brings us to the big question. How on earth did it get this bad? This wasn't a slow decline, it was a sudden, catastrophic failure. Well, analysts are calling it a perfect storm. And that's really the best way to think about it. It wasn't just one thing that went wrong. It was three massive problems all hitting Cuba at the exact same time, each one making the others worse until the whole system just snapped. And look how fast this happened. In January 2026, the U.S. helps oust Maduro in Venezuela. And boom, Cuba's cheap oil supply is gone, literally overnight. Just a few weeks later, the U.S. slaps a new global fuel blockade on the island. By March, after just 3 months of running on fumes, it's over. The grid collapses. So let's break down those three core causes. First, you lose your main oil supplier. That's a huge external shock. Second, you have the internal problem, an ancient power grid that hasn't been properly maintained for decades, a classic symptom of a strained state-run economy. And finally, you have this immense external pressure from the U.S., ramping up sanctions to what many are calling straight-up economic warfare.
Okay, so when a country is literally plunged into darkness, it forces people to talk. And that brings us to the high-stakes, backroom negotiations that are happening right now that could decide the island's future.
What was just rumor is now out in the open. In March, it came out that the Cuban government, led by President Diaz-Canel, is in direct talks with the Trump administration. They're trying to hammer out some kind of grand bargain to stop a full-blown humanitarian disaster.
But wow, the gap between what each side wants is massive. The U.S. is demanding huge political changes, the president stepping down, freeing hundreds of political prisoners, a total shift to a market economy. On the other side, Cuba has offered things that would have been unthinkable just a year ago, letting Cubans abroad invest, even inviting the FBI to Havana for security cooperation. But so far, they haven't budged on those core political demands. But this isn't just a fight between Havana and Washington. Let's zoom out and see who else is involved in this whole mess, because other countries are playing a huge role here.
So Cuba isn't totally alone. They have lifelines. China is the big one, sending food, but also very strategically investing in solar power. Russia, a classic ally, is helping where it can, and so is Mexico. But, and this is a huge but, all of that aid is really just a band-aid. It's not nearly enough to fix the problem, especially with that fuel blockade in place.
So, how exactly does this U.S. blockade work? It's not like there are warships surrounding the island. It's a financial blockade. The U.S. uses what are called secondary sanctions. Basically, they don't just punish Cuba, they punish anyone who helps Cuba. They can threaten any country that sends fuel with huge tariffs. They can seize oil tankers on the open ocean. And by keeping Cuba on the state sponsor of terrorism list, they effectively cut it off from the entire global banking system. It makes buying anything, even food and medicine, almost impossible.
So you've got all this pressure building up, inside and out, and it's brought Cuba to a major turning point. So that leads us to our final question. What happens next?
Well, experts are basically gaming out three possible futures here. The one they see as most likely is what's being called a friendly takeover. Basically, the government agrees to UN-monitored elections, and in return, U.S. aid floods in. Then there's the Vietnam model. The Communist Party hangs on to power, but they completely open up the economy to capitalism. And the last, kind of grim option, if the talks completely fail, the whole state could collapse, and the military might have to step in to manage, well, whatever's left.
When you boil it all down, this is the impossible choice the Cuban government is facing. It's a choice that's been simmering for more than 60 years, and now it's finally come to a head. Do you protect your political sovereignty, or do you do what's necessary for national survival? The stakes just could not be any higher. For the first time in a generation, the future of Cuba is completely up in the air. Caught between crushing international pressure and a total collapse from within, you have to wonder, which path will they be forced to take?